Hi, I'm Kaja.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Robinson Crusoe Adventures on the Cursed Island is a cooperative game from Ignacy Trzewiczek and Z-Man Games.
In Robinson Crusoe, players are castaways who are working together to survive their predicament. You can play with 1 to 4 players, and it takes about 2 hours. There is an expansion called Voyage of the Beagle, which provides you with a new set of scenarios which, when strung together, form a complete adventure.
Players begin Robinson Crusoe by choosing a scenario and noting any special setup rules. The board is laid out and starting morale and weapon levels are marked. 9 core invention cards plus 5 random inventions are placed invention side up on the board. The adventure, beast, and mystery cards are shuffled and placed face down, and the tokens and dice go beside the board.
Each player gets a character card, its matching invention, 2 pawns, and a wound marker which goes on its track. 2 starting item cards are drawn and marked with 2 black cubes, and an event deck is built based on the scenario. The starting tile and camp token go on the board, and remaining tiles are shuffled and stacked. The food crate wreckage card is set out, the first player is chosen, and the game begins.
Now, the scenario card determines the game's objective as well as how many rounds it lasts, and each round has 6 phases: event, morale, production, action, weather, and night.
In the event phase, players draw the top card from the event deck and resolve its top effect. If there's an adventure symbol on the card, you place a token in the appropriate action area on the board. If there's a book token on the event card, then that means that this event affects the scenario. Adventure and mystery cards will make the player resolve the bottom effect on the event card and draw and resolve another event.
A resolved event is placed in the rightmost threat space and it bumps the other cards left. Now, if a card is bumped off the board, then its threat effect is immediately resolved and it's discarded.
In the morale phase, the first player collects or discards a number of determination tokens determined by the morale track. If they have to discard more determination tokens than they have, then they gain a wound for every missing token. This also happens if you have to discard a resource and you can't, or if you have to go down a level and you can't. Every time a player's wound marker goes past a morale symbol, group morale goes down by 1.
In the production phase, players get 1 resource per food or wood source on their camp tile. Now, these resources go into the available resources space and they can be used right away.
In the action phase, players place their pawns on spaces on the board which correspond with their chosen actions. Actions are planned together, but then resolved one by one. Any resources or items gained during this phase go into the future resources section, because they cannot be used until after this round.
Players can remove a threat event card by fulfilling the pawn, resource, and item requirements listed on its bottom half. Hunting requires 2 pawns. Players draw a card from the hunting deck and compare their weapon level to the beast's strength. They take 1 wound for every point by which it exceeds their weapon level, decrease their weapon level by the amount shown, and collect the listed food and furs.
Building lets you create shelter, or increase roof, palisade, or weapon levels, or change an invention into an item at the cost listed on the invention card or on the board. A roof or a palisade can only be built onto an existing structure. Items provide bonuses to actions or levels, or give players extra pawns. Starting items can be used twice, and every time they're used, a black token is removed from the card.
For each gathering resources actions, players collect 1 resource from 1 source on a tile. This action and exploration can be performed on tiles adjacent to or 1 explored tile away from camp. Exploration reveals a new tile, and players collect the number of discovery tokens it lists, mark any invention prerequisites it fills, and resolve mystery icons according to the scenario. A card is shuffled into the hunting deck for every beast icon, and the tile's resources and natural shelter become available to the players.
If the players use 1 pawn for building, gathering resources, or exploration, they roll the 3 dice associated with the action. 1 die determines success or failure and gaining 2 determination tokens. 1 die determines wounds taken, and the last die determines if an adventure is triggered. If an adventure is triggered, then the player draws the top card from the appropriate adventure deck. Sending 2 pawns guarantees success, and no dice are rolled.
When taking an action, players must resolve any tokens that are on its space, and these may force you to reroll, increase the requirements for an action, or send you on an adventure. Each player's character sheet also lists a number of special actions that can be taken once per round by spending 2 determination tokens.
Arranging the camp lets a player collect 2 determination tokens and increase morale by 1. Resting allows you to heal 1 wound. After all actions are completed, all the pawns are removed from the board, and any items, resources, or tokens are moved from the future to the available resources area.
In the weather phase, the players roll the weather dice as indicated by the scenario card, and they add any tokens in the weather space. For every winter cloud, they discard 1 wood. The total number of clouds is compared to the roof level, and players discard 1 wood and 1 food for every cloud exceeding their roof. The hungry animals die may force the players to discard food, reduce the palisade level by 1, or fight a beast with a strength of 3. And storms reduce the palisade level by 1.
In the night phase, players discard 1 food each. If they don't eat, they take 2 wounds. Players also take a wound if they don't have any shelter. They can choose to move camp at this point, but will lose any shelter associated with the tile that they're leaving. Perishable food is discarded, a new first player is chosen, and the next round begins.
The game ends in success if the players complete their objective. If a player dies, or if their objective isn't completed by the end of the last round, then the players lose.
I like Robinson Crusoe. I'm a huge fan of cooperative games generally, and this is a very detailed, very interesting, and very complex cooperative game, and I really enjoy it. It's got a lot of variety in it. There's a lot of replayability here. The scenarios are all quite different, so every time you play with a new scenario, it feels like a different game. There's also a lot of interesting stuff that happens around the events and the adventures and the dice rolling. It's all quite random. You're gonna have to change your strategy on the fly quite often, and hopefully it'll be the kind of situation where you've got a lot of different people playing who are very interested and you can really talk it out, which is fantastic. That being said, this game does suffer quite heavily from the dictator problem. Now, this is the problem that comes up in many cooperative games. So how this works is the person at the table who knows the game the best, or maybe is just a little pushy, decides to take over and tell everybody what to do. Now, in this game, since actions are planned together, it has a real tendency of happening. So one person just tells everybody else what to do, where their pawn should go, and you end up getting a lot of people at the table who get really unhappy because they feel left out. So make sure you watch for that in this game.
Another possible hurdle, especially when you're playing this game for the first time, is that it is incredibly information dense. The rules aren't all that complicated. There's not a huge amount of stuff for you to do. It's not very high in complexity in that regard, but there's a ton to remember. You have to know what provides what resources, under what conditions, what the different effects of the dice are, how you need to resolve certain things, and there's just a ton of memorizing that needs to happen before you can really get the game going smoothly. And that's going to be challenging for a big group playing for the first time. I'd recommend having one player really familiarize themselves with the game first. It can also slow things down a bit when you introduce a new player to an experienced group for the first time. Now, once you have learned when you discard food and when you discard wood and when you take wounds and when all of these things need to play out, the game actually moves very smoothly. This is definitely a heavier cooperative game. It's not light, it's not fluffy, it's not fast, but it does play out pretty solidly in 2 hours, which is really great for a game of this difficulty and weight. The turns move quite quickly. You don't ever feel like you're sitting around and waiting for something to happen, and it adds a really great pacing to the game where you do feel like events are moving along quite quickly, sometimes too quickly for you to catch up and complete your objectives, and so it adds this really nice sense of urgency that really increases the immersion. Another thing that for me just really adds to the immersion and really contributes positively to this game is the art. It's very pretty, but it's also really appropriate to the theme. It's got kind of a period feel to it. This doesn't feel like a super modern game in terms of its visual design. There's a nice kind of bit of sketchy line work to it. It's a little bit old-fashioned. It almost looks like block printing or something like that. And it just really adds a lot of depth and a lot of flavor. I will also throw in that I really like the fact that there are female avatar options on the backsides of all of the character cards, so that just adds a little bit more opportunity for immersion for players who might not normally have it, and that really does just make this game a great all-around package.
If you could take 3 games to a desert island, what would they be?